right, so hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining this session. I hope you've been enjoying the DataViz so far. My name is Kasia Gąsiewska-Holc and I'm a Tableau Public ambassador, and I will explain in a second what that means exactly. But I'm also a DataViz consultant at Sage Data, which is the data consultancy company. And at my day-to-day job, I help clients across various different industries to find the most efficient and optimized analytical solutions. My interest lies specifically in the field of data visualization, as I recognize that effective business dashboard design is key in adoption of data literacy principles and in building strong foundation to the data culture at any organization. And I think that far too frequently, data visualization is just nearly skimmed over and is not really given the proper focus it deserves while trying to address core business questions. So I think it's my opinion that you could really have all the data in the world, but it wouldn't really matter if you can't effectively present it to your stakeholders and users. And what DataViz does for insight is kind of like what advertising does for a product. Even the best and most functional and maybe innovative products need to be promoted via right channels in order to put the message in front of those who can benefit from it. And just like advertising, if used incorrectly, DataViz can mislead rather than inform. So it is important to use it with caution, and that's why it's been my mission, both at work and also outside of it, to build an open forum in order to kind of encourage people to discuss topics around importance of data visualization and some best practices behind this particular field of data science. So there are many tools available to data visualization practitioners, but I have decided to center my career around Tableau, which I used to create both business dashboards for my everyday clients and personal projects outside of work. And the latter would be published to Tableau Public, which is a free tool available for anyone interested in kind of practicing DataViz. And there's also a very strong DataViz community called DataFam around this tool, where people from around the world just connect and share their work, their ideas with other like-minded individuals. And Tableau pays quite a lot of attention to this community as they regularly promote most interesting and prominent content creators. And I would encourage you to check out some of these resources to get inspired and perhaps become a part of this amazing, open, and supportive community. And you can start by checking out the Tableau Public page, specifically this Discover page that I'm having a picture of in here. So yeah, this is very useful. You can also connect with me directly if you want to learn more. Because as a Tableau Public ambassador, my goal is also to collaborate and educate people. And I just want to connect with people in the community. So would love to hear from you if this is something you might be more interested in. So moving on to the topic of today's presentation, about 2 weeks ago, I have created this viz. It's called Refugees, actually Humans Like Us. And I created it on Tableau Public, and the viz focuses on refugees. And while the viz explores refugees migration since 1960s, it has been inspired by and has a special focus on refugees situation that is currently unfolding in Ukraine. I come from Poland, and we are close neighbors to Ukraine, so the conflict really hits close home. And ever since the war has started in Ukraine, I have felt an immense sense of like fear and anxiety about future. And I'm sure many of us just feel helpless about this situation. Because as we're watching it tragically unfold in front of our eyes, there's very little that we can do to really stop it. So this feeling can be quite overwhelming, and that was definitely the case for me. So I did as much as I could to kind of provide support in terms of material support to refugees fleeing the conflict and those who are still stuck in the epicenter of it. But I was still so shaken with these events that I couldn't focus on anything pertaining to my daily routine. I have noticed that at work, my attention span has declined. I also found it really hard to work on some other lighthearted DataViz projects that I've previously planned to create. Because I kind of felt like it was unfair for me to focus on all of these things when just around the corner there are people who are dying, losing families, and are being robbed of their futures, essentially. So let me move on to the next slide here. So this is when I stumbled upon this data source and some other articles. Shocking articles are outlining Ukrainian refugee statistics thus far. And that was, I think I've came across this article around beginning of April. So this is when the idea for this came up in my mind. It just felt right. I wanted to compare the number of refugees in this short span of time to other historical conflicts. But the main priority for me was to emphasize that behind all of these numbers, there are actual human beings, people who are losing their lives and everything they worked on, while we, the citizens of countries that are not directly impacted by this crisis, we have a privilege to live our regular, mostly undisturbed lives. So that was the crucial message that I wanted to convey with my viz, which goes beyond simply reporting the numbers. So let's have a look at the viz in its interactive format. Let me just bring that up in here. So that's the viz on Tableau Public. You can access it later after the presentation if you want. It's open to anyone. So as you can see, the viz is quite simplistic. It's quite minimalistic, as I didn't want to clutter it with too much information. The goal was simple, just to analyze the refugees associated with various conflicts across the years and highlight the data coming from the war in Ukraine. But I wanted to make sure that this human aspect is reflected in the viz, hence the title design and the intro at the top, which kind of serves as a reminder that behind all of these numbers, there are people just like you and me, and that we shouldn't take our freedom for granted, because one day it might as well be us fleeing our countries. As for the main part of the viz, which is this flower chart, as I call it, I wanted to analyze the topic of refugees using a variety of different metrics to give users ability to analyze the subject from different angles. So if we look at the chart a bit more closely, we can see that each flower represents a different conflict. So in this case, we have a conflict in Ethiopia. And the flower consists of different parts. So we have the stem, we have the base of the flower, the center of it, and petals. And each one of these parts represents a different metric. So the flower base, for example, the blue flower base, it shows the population of the country affected by the conflict. And you have the legend in here just for reference, but you can also hover over each element to see the exact number. However, you don't have to do that, because from this chart, it's also important to see just like maybe how conflicts compare to one another. So you can see right away that maybe this conflict has affected a country with the high population overall, versus maybe this one affected a country when the population was much smaller. And then you can also see the Ukrainian conflict here with an annotation. So you can kind of gauge the population in this case by the size of the base, because the bigger the base, the higher the population. And the same goes for the center of the flower, which is this red half of the circle. So the bigger the center, the more refugees we have in a given country. And the refugees number is reinforced by the petals image. So each flower can have 10 petals, and each missing petal represents 10% of the country's population that is refugees, basically. So the the less petals you have, so the more sparse these petals are, the higher the impact of the refugee crisis on a given country's population. So just as this example, for example, in Afghanistan, for the Afghan-Soviet War, you can see that 48% of the entire population of the country were refugees at the peak year. So you can see that those petals in here are quite sparse. So the kind of effect of the conflict is quite visible in here. Then the last metric that we're showing in here is the length of the crisis, which is represented by the stem of the flower. So the longer the stem, the longer the conflict. So we have the Taliban insurgency, for example, conflict, which has lasted 19 years so far, and I've added some grid lines with tick marks for 5, 10, 15, 20 years markers, so that it's easier to kind of compare them visually. But just comparing the Taliban insurgency, for example, to the Ukrainian conflict right now, you can see that a similar percentage of population became refugees in these conflicts. However, this one has lasted just a couple of months, whereas the other one has lasted now 19 years. So you can kind of compare them in that way as well. And in order to make it easier to compare those conflicts through different criteria, I've added the view selector at the top. So if I want to, for example, see which are the countries that have the highest percentage of population being refugees, I can switch over to that kind of a view, and then everything that is placed towards the left-hand side of the chart will tell me which conflicts have the higher percentage of population being refugees, and so on and so on. So you can also do that for the crisis duration and the number of refugees. And that's essentially the chart. And then at the bottom, I've also added a little icon in here that goes to the United Nations Refugee Agency. So I wanted to add some sort of a call to action, maybe for those who want to get involved and want to make a donation, for example. So that's pretty much all about the chart. However, there's one thing that I wanted to point out about this particular viz, because I think it serves as a great example that you can use, in this case, Tableau, even if you don't have like amazing Tableau skills, or maybe you're not super strong at graphic design, you can still create something quite interesting and I think visually appealing. Like in this case, I think my favorite part of this viz is that we're showing conflicts in the form of the flower, and for me this is quite symbolic because a flower to me represents life. So it's almost like when you see those petals missing, it's like the flower is dying. It's almost like the country is dying because people are fleeing their motherland and they become refugees. So so that was quite symbolic to me, but from the technical point of view, that was actually quite easy to achieve in Tableau. So I would like to take a couple of minutes, a reminder of this session, to give you like a very quick tutorial on how you could create a similar flower chart in Tableau Public, which is a free tool if you decide to use it. But yeah, like maybe that would serve as an inspiration for one of your DataViz projects in future. So let me jump back into the presentation for a second. So again, that was the data source. The data source was very simple. It's just a list of events and information about the peak number of refugees in the peak year and the percentage of population that it represented in the peak year. But then for this particular viz, we had to create the flower graphics. And I think the powerful part of this particular viz is that you don't really need to have any specific graphic tools, such as Adobe Illustrator, to do that. You can do this in PowerPoint, actually. You can just create those shapes in PowerPoint, as I actually did myself. And you can just use, gradient fills and some settings on simple geometrical shapes to make a bit more like a powerful visual with it, rather than just a flat image. But you can create everything in PowerPoint within seconds, really. So that's what I did in here. And the flower really consists of 3 parts. So we have those petals, which represents every missing petal represents percentage of 10% of population being refugees. Then we have the center for our number of refugees, and the base for the entire population. So all you need to do really in PowerPoint is to create those shapes with a blank, a translucent square in the behind it, and just save it as PNG to your Tableau repository. Tableau repository is a folder you can is automatically created when you have Tableau on your desktop, but the reason why it has to be within the square is that Tableau always resizes shapes from a center outwards or center inwards. So in order to make sure that everything resizes properly, when we show different number of population, different number of refugees, we just have to make sure that it's all within that square. So let's assume that this has been saved, because I've saved it to my Tableau repository. It's really just a PNG file of these shapes. And then we can jump right into Tableau real quick, and I can show you how to do this within minutes. So this is our data source. To the left in here, I've only had to create a couple of different calculations. So one for duration of refugee crisis, because it wasn't readily available, but it was easy to calculate. And same goes for the other 2 calculations for the population in the peak year, as I knew what the percentage of population was, and I knew what the exact number of refugees was, so I was able to create these quite easily. But I need them for for information how the flower should be resized. So in this case, I'm only using the Taliban insurgency conflict to show you the example. And you might have noticed that in PowerPoint, I did not create any stem. And this is because stem is really the easiest part of the chart. It's just a simple bar chart, really. So if I drag duration of the conflict to my rows, this is actually a stem. I know it doesn't look like it just yet, but if I change the mark type to bar and resize it to the thinnest size ever, this already kind of resembles what we are aiming for. And now what I'm aiming for is to place those flower elements, so the shapes that we've created in PowerPoint, on the top of the line in here. So the way I have to do this is I have to duplicate my pill on the rows, and I have to go to the settings of that second pill. So you can see that I have separate settings for this line and this line. And then here I want to change it to shape. So for those of you familiar with Tableau, you know that in order to create 2 different mark types on the same chart, we need to create 2 separate kind of row pills or column pills, and just create and combine them later on, let's say. So let's do that now. So for our shapes, we're going to use measure names. So we want to have a different shape for each measure. So we want to have one shape for the base of the flower, and one for the center, and one for petals. So you can use the shape mark and just drag the measure name onto the shapes bill to indicate that we want to give all shapes, different shapes to different measures. And the measure value will be used to resize those elements. So you might not see that much has happened in here, but this is just because of the size at the moment. But you can see that now I have this legend in here that tells me that Tableau is currently plotting all of the measures on the top of one another in here. And it's just resizing them based on the value of these metrics, but we don't need all of them. So I'm going to use measure name as my filter. And I'm just going to select the 3 measures that I need. So the flower base, the flower center, and petals. And now let me just resize that a bit so that you can see. Okay, so by default, Tableau just uses some random shapes. I have all the 3 metrics that I need, but the shapes are not what I'm hoping for. I actually want to use my PowerPoint shape. So I'm going to go to edit options and just go to the repository of shapes in here. So this is just the reference to the folder that you have on your desktop. And you can see that we have those shapes saved in here, so I can just reassign them to those measures in here. And if I hit OK, the flower has been created. So now the only thing that is left in here really is to combine these 2. So I want them to appear together. So what I have to do is right-click on one of these pills and select dual axis. And then we have a flower created. However, the stem still kind of sticks out of it. This is because the axes are not synchronized. So I would just have to right-click on any of the axes and select to synchronize them. And now it's kind of disappeared. So I'm going to change the color of the bar slightly to align with the greenery theme, and maybe change the opacity slightly of our flower so that I can see the stem in the background a little bit. And then the cosmetic change would be just to hide the headers, the axis, and hide the any row dividers and column dividers, because I just want to keep it very minimalistic. So I don't even need grid lines, so I'm going to remove them here. And there you have it. That's the flower that we've just created. Now you can see that tooltips are not formatted. So if we go back to the actual viz, in here, I made sure that tooltips are formatted so that it's easy to understand the numbers referred in each part of the flower. So you can do the same in Tableau, but you can just customize a tooltip however you want. That was just one of the ways that I've used in there. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you found it useful. And yeah, maybe it would serve as an inspiration for your next DataViz project. Thank you.